Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today. It's my honour to second a motion by my colleague from Edmonton Centre, his private member's bill C-229, to repeal the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, which has held back this country's economic development, this country's environmental development, and this country's social development since it was passed over 4 years ago. In effect, it came about after C-48 officially, which was one of the last pieces of legislation this past government enforced in its last mandate in the 42nd Parliament. Undoing this is obviously very important. It's very important for the country for so many reasons. But it's very important to recognize the value it adds if we repeal this to our entire country. You can't talk about the repeal of this motion without talking about infrastructure in Canada. And we're talking about ports and we're talking about pipelines. As much as we can talk about ports, because this is a repeal of a shipping ban on oil products above a certain quantity, we really have to speak about pipelines because this emanated from the pipelines. To get our resource to market, and our oil resource in Canada is inland. It has to traverse a long distance in order to get to the ports which will take it to market. Those pipelines are inextricably linked with the industry that supplies their product. And that product, of course, continues to expand in Canada and legitimately continues to expand in Canada because it is a very well-known, environmentally friendly resource that the world needs at this point in time and is going to need for decades to come. For us to turn our backs on that reality at this point in time is short-sightedness on our part. We are competing in a world where oil is produced in much less environmentally friendly jurisdictions around the world. We need to make sure, for the environment's sake, that we get the better product to market that has much less of a footprint around the world. The thing about the oil and gas industry is it looks to getting its resource to market efficiently and economically, and that requires a constructive regulatory environment to build infrastructure like pipelines. Getting a pipeline to the coast so you can get that product off the coast to its customer is essential. Long-term planning, economics are involved in all of this, and every one of the companies that builds these or plans these puts those perspectives together at the outset so they actually know what the transparency of the outcome is going to be. That is something that's been lost in Canada as far as getting projects built, and we need to address that. Let me talk about a concept called monopsony. Now, I'm sure the members on the other side know about monopoly, where you have one supplier. A monopsony is where you have one customer for your product. That's what we have in Canada with our oil industry at this point in time. All our exported oil from Canada goes to one international customer, and that customer, of course, is the United States. Getting oil offshore is essential to break that monopsony and therefore get a better price for our oil and gas resources. That's not happening right now. And when you quantify that about what that means to the Canadian economy, it equates to about $16 billion per year on what we are currently producing in oil alone. $16 billion is disappearing from the pockets of Canadians somewhere else. And that's because we get such a discount, what's called a differential, Mr. Speaker, on our price in the American market. $16 billion a year, the last 5 years, this current government's mandate, if you will, would equate to about $80 billion to the Canadian economy. That's $80 billion. I know it seems small in relation to the amount of money that's going out the door right now, but $80 billion is real money, Mr. Speaker. The shame of this is much of this product we export to our monopsonistic partner, the United States, goes to refineries, and some of it comes back to Canadians where we pay a world price for it. So we're not only losing money on the export, but we're actually paying more money on the import of our own product, which is a shame across this country. Let's talk about the oil and gas industry here. It is a high-cost industry in Canada. It's high cost for a reason. And part of that reason, of course, is the regulatory and environmental demands we put on the industry to make sure that they produce a product that is accountable to Canadians, but also meets an environmental standard that is world-class. It's the most environmentally friendly oil produced in the world. And I'd like to make sure that my colleagues in the House become more educated on the full cycle environmental costs of the production of Canadian oil, because it beats the world. We have many things to consider in this regard, and of course, cost is one, but environmental performance is very important. Canada produces about 5 million barrels of oil per day. This was before, of course, COVID. We've all been cut back, and that's of a pre-COVID demand of about 100 million barrels per day. So we're the third largest reserves in the world, but down as far as production goes because of other constraint factors. But we have a great resource and a great value to add to the world in this respect. I'd like to add something else economically here that I'm sure people in this House understand, and that's the balance of payments. Canada right now has about an $18 billion balance of payments on its goods deficit in 2019. Well, you go back, Mr. Speaker, to what I spoke about how much we're not getting world price for our oil product, $16 billion. Our goods deficit would be whittled down substantially. And there is no product that we actually produce in Canada that contributes more to our balance of payments than oil does at this point in time. It means something. You think about that. It means jobs. It means benefits to Canadians as they pay their taxes, as they get their pensions, as they get and they contribute to social services across the country. Taxes, services, governments, individuals, we all prosper if we have a more economically beneficial industry. But let's ask you, where is this money going? If you talk about $16 billion per year, who's making that money right now? It doesn't disappear. Somebody else is taking that world price. We are not. Somebody's making money, and there's an interest here that has not been identified openly, which is an economic interest in the United States, who is collecting as well taxes on a value-added product that we do not receive the benefit for here in Canada. Into this mix on pipelines entered Enbridge in the mid-2000s, first decade of this millennium, thinking they can solve so much of this with a new project called Northern Gateway and getting our oil to market. It was a $7.9 billion project on page. It went through almost a decade of regulatory hearings. $100 million was spent on the regulatory process in Canada in order to get our oil to market, solving so many things, breaking the monopsony, building jobs, increasing production from an environmentally friendly resource across Canada, and contributing in a beneficial way to the world environment. In addition, the Indigenous participation was written to the agreement. They actually had equity participation in the pipeline, the first of its kind, something that's being replicated now, but it was the first one that actually had Indigenous equity participation. In June 2014, that pipeline was approved with 209 conditions. Those 209 conditions included a spill response mechanism for the North Shore of British Columbia. That spill response mechanism was essential to get around the moratorium on oil shipping, which had been in place since 1972. And I know my colleagues in other parts of the House would say that that was necessary in order to make sure we didn't have any oil spills off the North Coast, such as they've had one time in Alaska. Now, Mr. Speaker, 209 conditions, including a spill response, would have effectively solved that. There's risk here. There's risk in the U.S. continuing to export oil in the areas where Canada excludes the export of oil, and this environmental benefit doesn't exist. It only constrains Canadian oil. It does not constrain any other oil that is in the area. This is not acceptable to Canadians. This pipeline was overturned by this government, and the Prime Minister, when he came in, made no bones about it. He was going to play to special interests without the balance of considerations about who was going to actually benefit from the cancellation and where those costs. And Mr. Speaker, there are no costs without benefits, and there are no benefits without costs. That assessment was not made properly. And I suggest to you that this ban on foreign shipping was wrong-headed, and that this motion to undo it is completely acceptable, and I support it 100%, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.